Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Welcome back to Paul's Security Weekly. Yeah, we are more than happy to announce that Infosec World 2021 will be in person October 25th through the 27th in 2021. Our annual partnership with Infosec World is extra special as we are both business units under the Cyber Risk Alliance. What does that mean for Security Weekly listeners and Infosec World attendees? You will get to see and hear from many of the Security Weekly team at the event and save 20% off your World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register using our discount code. This segment is sponsored by Qualys. securityweekly.com/Qualys to learn more. Joining us today from Qualys is Sumedh Thakar, the CEO, a product fanatic and engineer at heart. He is a driving force behind expanding the platform from vulnerability management into broader areas of security and compliance, helping customers consolidate their security stack. This week, he joins us to discuss digital transformation's impact on IT asset visibility. Sumedh, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Paul. Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you on today and talk about asset discoverability, visibility, and things of that nature. You know, it's interesting. Sumedh is I've and many of us have worked in vulnerability management in some capacity, and I still get kind of a kick out of it. I'm sure this has happened to you where customers, people who are using VM products, whatever it is, go, you know, I wish it didn't tell me about so much because then I have to fix it. I think
yeah, you know, the best product is the one that has tells you have no issues, right?
Right. It's like a weird conundrum, and I think it, you know, obviously speaks to the security maturity model, and what we're going to talk about today, I think, plays in that security maturity model. And I find customers or enterprises that are further along, like, really have this concern about, yeah, it's like, I know I can scan and find stuff, and that's cool, and I've got a process for that. But like, what about the stuff I don't know about? And that's where they're really concerned.
Yeah, you know, and this challenge is becoming recently more and more sort of with the digital transformation, more types of assets being added, and the speed at which they are being added is changing, right? So in the past, you change control, and maybe once a month you went in the data center and added a bunch of servers, and, you know, it was very well controlled. But today it's with virtualization and just your office environment, work from home. Your starting point for security, your asset inventory is a real challenge, right? Where do you start where does your security start, right? Just to put your security solutions, you need to know what you have. And I think that's the problem that everybody's facing, has been facing, and is getting kind of more and more complicated, I would say.
Yeah, because I think there's certainly a mindset change from when I traditionally think of an asset inventory. You know, when I worked for corporations, universities, what have you, when you got issued a thing, that thing had an asset tag. That could be a laptop, a monitor, a phone, tablet, whatever it is, had an asset tag on it, and that was your asset management. And that had a completely different purpose than what we're talking about in asset inventory today.
Yeah, that's a great point, because the asset inventory that we have today, and a lot of security teams depend on the IT team giving them the starting point of the inventory, and was never really meant for this sort of a real-time, you know, updated inventory. And you know, there's inventories, the hardware inventory of the devices that you have, and then there's the inventory of what are you running on those devices, right? And I think the IT inventory has been very focused on, you know, I tag my asset, who's the owner of the asset, maybe some relationship between these assets, when's the warranty going to expire, you know, what kind of software licenses am I using? And that's a very different use case we see from cybersecurity professionals, the kind of things they are looking from an inventory solution, right?
Yeah, because now today that can be anything from a SaaS instance to cloud services to a certificate to software to whatever.
Absolutely, right, and that's your environment is becoming a combination of multiple different things, and the ephemeral nature makes it, at any given point for a security team, what's my asset inventory? And what's interesting is that if you look at FedRAMP and PCI, and more of these mandates really have requirements around having a good handle of your inventory now. In the past, it wasn't that. They were not pushing it that much, but now it's becoming even more, where FedRAMP, as an example, they ask you to start with a good starting point. And, we've seen that a lot, where the device that you don't know in an environment that you don't have a security solution protecting that device is something that can be compromised, because the attackers, they find it out and you don't.
Yeah, I've often thought that sometimes the fact that I have something is a vulnerability. Like, I should not have that in my asset inventory ever, right?
We can have a whole different segment just talking about what a vulnerability is, right? Because I think the definition of a vulnerability has a much broader context than just a software flaw that has a CVE. A lot of time people saying, I'm not vulnerable because I patch my software, but hey, by the way, your C drive is an open share for everybody to read and write in the whole network. But that's not a vulnerability according to them. That's a configuration issue, right? And I think a vulnerability in the broader sense includes a lot of different things, and we saw recently with the FBI sent out the warning, people running TeamViewer on servers and desktops and using it for one purpose and just leaving it there. So now the TeamViewer software may not have a vulnerability, but just the fact that you're running that can cause a vulnerability in your environment, where somebody else could use that to attack your network.
And that's what one of the things you announced this week, right, is new capabilities. Because I believe, I won't speak for you, Sumedh, but you look at it beyond the CVE, and I think there's a lot of people still stuck in that perception that VM gives me visibility into all the CVEs. And I mean, it's traditionally always been more than that after a certain point, right? And you're continuing to expand on that.
Yeah, and I think over the last few years, we've seen our customers really struggle with getting their starting point of inventory. And, there's really no good solution that sort of, from a cybersecurity perspective, gives you your full inventory, right? There's some couple of aggregators trying to pull some information from different sources. And I think just the reality is that there is no one single solution. You really need to pull data from multiple sensors continuously correlated in the backend and kind of give that starting point. But we kind of felt like this was a space that customers needed help on to just get started, to know their starting point of where you want to put your security solutions. And as we worked with the organizations, we realized more and more that they're struggling with basic things like what am I running on these assets, right? Are they authorized? Is the software running on these assets authorized? So you kind of have a device itself is unauthorized, but you may have an authorized device that's running an unauthorized software, or you may have devices that are running, but they're missing some of the critical software that should be there from a monitoring and an observability perspective. We know the favorite of our assets are showing up on Shodan, which is like a Google for come hack me, right? And how do you know about your inventory, and where is this inventory popping up? So there's just so many different aspects of inventory for cybersecurity purposes, and that's kind of where we decided to come up with a way to give customers more of a consolidated inventory, which we call as cybersecurity asset management. And the idea there is, can we leverage multiple sensors, active scan, passive sniffing, agents, connections, API connections with other solutions like a CMDB to pull this information, correlate that, and provide the cybersecurity professional some sort of a starting point of a live inventory, so to say, right? I think the issue that we see with CMDBs is that they were not architected where you could have a real-time, always updated view. They were meant to have periodic updates when IT commissions a new device with an asset tag, as you said, and then put that in there. But of course, they have some useful information that needs to be aggregated. And that's where we feel like this is an interesting capability that we're looking for feedback from a lot of organizations, because this is an unsolved problem right now. And we need to kind of work together to figure out how can we have a good starting point? We are not missing assets, and we're not missing software that should not be there on these assets.
Jeff?
To be fair, Sumedh, and I'm not calling out Qualys specifically, but the perception that all the scans are all about the CVEs and finding software vulnerabilities, in my opinion, has largely come from the scan vendors over the years. Certain other ones I think of maybe before Qualys, but a lot of the problems in this industry are sort of self-sustained, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think that's a maturity model, right? Software vulnerabilities are one of the key things that you need to fix. And I think over the last multiple years, organizations, because of compliance requirements, because of policies internally, have been getting better and better at focusing on fixing software-related vulnerabilities that have been known. I mean, we can write books about how there's vulnerabilities out there that are patchable, but have been out there for 3 years that are exploitable, and people haven't fixed those, right? But there are organizations that are continuing to do well in progressing, in fixing things, and that's one of the things with VMDR. We have worked with our customers to give them a better way to patch the software vulnerabilities. And I think as that maturity is coming in, it's definitely time to start looking at the broader perspective, right? So good, you're patching vulnerabilities on devices that you know about, but do you know of all the devices out there? And are there other issues on the system that are beyond the software vulnerability that needs to be patched, right? Are there misconfigurations? Is there software that's running that should not be running, like a remote desktop on a server because an admin deployed it there for some purpose and then forgot to take it off, right?
Yeah, I mean, God forbid you should have a service running on a system that you don't need.
Never happens, right?
Never happens.
I mean, just look at end of life as an example, right? When Flash went end of life at the end of the year, we did a quick assessment of our users, and we were able to see like 20 million installations of Flash were still there, right? This was in January, and so end of life software is like the beginning of life for the hackers, right? Like they're looking for end of life software because that's not being updated. So good way to hack those, and we're seeing people have installed browsers on servers because they wanted to download something, or they've installed remote desktop because they wanted to help somebody fix something, and they just forget it or leave it there. And I think that becomes an additional issue that needs to be looked into.
Yeah, I think having an inventory of your software and the fact that software that's end of life exists is very telling about the security posture of your systems. Because if Flash still exists in your browser, that means you haven't updated your browser in quite some time, right?
Well, it happens all the time. And, look at, for example, when we were looking at our own systems, and we realized one of the top patches we were applying was Firefox. And we were thinking, who is using Firefox, right, in the environment? Barely anybody, but it was somebody put it as part of the build of the laptop image a couple of years ago, and then it just goes out to every employee, and then we just keep patching it. And so we realized that this is an unwanted software that we don't need, and we can save a lot of time because of the visibility that we are able to get. We can just uninstall Firefox from these machines, and then we can reduce the amount of patching that we're doing because nobody's using that. But that means that you need to have the visibility.
Sorry, does that mean you're collecting usage data on applications as well? Is that in the platform? You can see how well used Firefox is?
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're collecting the last time that software was used also, right?
Gotcha.
When was it installed? When was it used the last time? So that's important. I was just going to make that point that it's not also just about whether the software is installed. Is it actively being used on the systems is another data point that's critical, right? And this whole software inventory and hardware inventory in itself is a big area of data collection, analysis, correlation, totally outside of vulnerability management and configuration assessment, etc.
That has the unintended I guess advantage additionally for business insights, right? So not just is an application being utilized correctly, but when you're talking about end-of-life hardware, you can make business decisions around the risk and how old devices are, whether those need a technical refresh, whether the entire organization as a whole can benefit from doing a technical refresh rather than doing, upgrades, patching. All of those things are insights that are very hard to get from a business analytical standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. You need that data. For example, I have all this software. How much of that is actually being used? And maybe I'm paying for software that I'm not really using, right? I mean, that's that's not a cybersecurity use case, but there's many of those use cases where you can get additional information from the hardware and the software, right? But yes, I mean, from a given vendor, how much hardware do I have? And the end of life as an example, right? Like, how as an organization do you track hundreds and thousands of software vendors out there that are announcing end of life all the time? So how do you track that? And so it starts to become the same kind of an issue that we had with vulnerability management, which is, how do I as an organization know all these vendors who are issuing advisories? How do I check that? And do I have a system? And that's essentially what we focused on, to say, well, we're going to go build a team and go out and collect all end-of-life information, bring that into the platform, and then provide a way for customers to check for end-of-life hardware, end-of-life software through a sort of a single pane of glass. So at least you start to get that visibility. Otherwise, as an organization, how can you go out and have people start to look at, hey, here's all my software, how much of this is end-of-life, as an example?
Sumedh, there's a lot of great resources that can give you data about your external footprint. You mentioned Shodan earlier. My question is, and I've always wanted this, working with VM, products a lot, is like, why wouldn't someone just do an external vulnerability scan of all their known domains and IP addresses versus going out to Shodan? Like, what's the difference in your opinion?
So it's the difference between what you know versus what everybody else knows, right? So organizations do external scans, and the key word that you use is known, right? So they think that these are my networks, so that's what I'm scanning, only to find out that domains have been spun up, or people have brought up instances in a new IP space that the IT team was not tracking. So it's not a one single solution, right? It is a combination. Of course, we have millions and millions of external scans that customers are doing what they think they know about. And then we're augmenting that now with saying that, hey, this thing is showing up on Shodan. And the way you kind of look at that is to say, well, if I'm scanning my environment and I know of an asset, that's fine, I'm looking at it. But as soon as that asset is now also showing up on Shodan and other sites, now other people also know about that in a very easy way without having to do a scan.
So
that becomes high priority now.
I hadn't considered it in the priority scheme of things, that what other people know about that I don't should take up that priority.
I would also argue on the converse of the priority. Sorry, Tyler, I jumped in from you. But if it's showing up on Shodan and you've decommissioned it.
Yeah, wait, is it really decommissioned?
Is it really decommissioned? And now you know it's decommissioned. Is it as much of a priority?
So I would go further to say, you think you've decommissioned it.
Yeah. Right? That was to Paul's point.
It's still showing up.
Yep.
But does that take into account like cloud stuff too, like where you're have things like expired domains or expired, say, cloud services where you may be able to take over like a subdomain? I think we talked about this on the webcast, Paul, where people forget about registered services or domain names that have CNAMEs pointed, and you can do a subdomain takeover. Those assets are assets that are typically, like you said, decommissioned, misconfigured, not thought about, not renewed, things that are outside of the common inventory control, or maybe prior to inventory or asset management. Does that take into account some of those?
Well, see, this conversation itself brings up the point of how wide the scope of this thing is, right? When you start looking at assets, is a certificate an asset, right? Do I need to know my certificates and what was expiring? And as you said, right, there's no one single way of tracking this sort of subdomains that are not being utilized. And that's where we partner, and we're partnering to bring information from additional sources where we can now provide the visibility to the customers to say, Qualys is able to pick up this with our sensors, and then here's data about domains that or subdomains or things that have expired, certificates that are out there. So you kind of start to look at and help prioritize those, right? Because that's one thing to say like, hey, this thing is showing up on the environment and I know about it, versus things that are showing up in the environment, I don't know, but they're showing up somewhere else, etc. So there's different ways that you really track this and look at that. So I mean that's why it's important to have a way to collect data and start to look at it and correlate that just from an inventory perspective.
Is that an ingestion option, or is that a partnership where you're essentially querying and partnering with very specific services that are providing that feed? Can you just essentially provide an API and have that data ported into Qualys where it's considering those as part of its asset management?
It's all of the above, right? So we have built in a way to say we're going to go out. We know how ServiceNow CMDB works, and we're going to pull the data from there. But then there's also an API available. If you have something else and you want to put asset information, pull or push asset information, then there's an API also available, because again, there is no sort of one single way to do this. It's really has to be it's a problem of data collection and correlation. And that's somewhere with the cloud platform that we have built over a period of time, where we're today indexing like 9 trillion data points. We're doing 8 trillion data points. We're doing like 15 billion messages on Kafka every day. So we can collect data from multiple sources and kind of start to correlate this information.
How do you know how do you validate the sources, Sumedh? Because I mean, we've done this. We've got open source tools and have tested out a lot of things, and you kind of get a feeling some sources are better than others. What's your method?
The customers have different tools, right? And they have different partners that they work with. So having the ability to kind of have an out-of-the-box way to correlate, and then letting them customize some of this correlation, I think that's the part that we are working with customers to say, there's no one easy way. In some cases, you're going to be able to correlate based on a MAC address. In other cases, you're going to be able to correlate based on an IP address. In other cases, it's maybe what's an ID of a software that's installed on the system, right? Are these agents pulling BIOS IDs, and we can correlate things with these BIOS IDs. If you see a device based on a passive sensor, and in some cases, you're going to say, I saw this one device through these 8 different sources, right? And you're going to have situations where things don't line up, the same device is being picked up, but that's where you need an iterative way to do that. And as an example, Qualys, we have a bunch of agents, and people deploy agents, but then when you do a remote scan, just an unauthorized sweep of the network, it wasn't picking up the agent ID, and so you kind of end up creating a different asset because the remote scan saw an asset. So then we went ahead and added a way to say that the agent can expose an encrypted ID to the scan. So now when you do a remote scan, it picks up that ID, and then in the back end, it correlates that. So you reduce your duplicates, right? So I think there's things that we are doing, but there's definitely an opportunity for the wider industry to start to think of, how do I find a way to identify assets uniformly so that different tools can pick this up and we can really track assets throughout. Today, it's just all over the place. It's just a bunch of different ways that you have to use to track assets.
Some of the remediation is very different as well. And to Tyler's point, when you look at the subdomain takeover, Tyler, I was going through our DNS, and I'm like, I need to go clean that up because Tyler talked about this thing and it's really bad. How do you find your customers are reacting to the expanded capabilities and having to maybe adjust some of their processes to go, this isn't I go to the patch team, this is I got to go to my infrastructure team and fix DNS?
Yeah. There's so many different ways to resolve different things, and one thing for sure we see in the last couple of years is there's a big push from security teams to not just give them reports of thousands of pages for them to fix, but find ways to fix those, whether it's after a manual approval or through automation, but systems that can fix things, right? And so with VMDR, for example, we have an integration with patch management where the same agent can also patch your system. So today you can actually set a policy that says, on all my laptops, I always want my Adobe software updated. You don't have to create a job and somebody approve it. If it's a laptop and there's an update from Adobe, just patch it, right? So that reduces the amount of effort that the humans have to do when patching things that should already be patched in anyway. Maybe it doesn't work as well on the servers. And in some cases, like I said, the solution is not to patch. You just need a way to uninstall that software because it's not being used. In other cases, you may need to manually go and make changes to your DNS. In other cases, it's a ServiceNow ticket. And that's really the reality of today where we are. And so what we did with the cybersecurity asset management is also provide a certain number of ways to take care of the issues, right? Maybe you can uninstall software that you don't need. Just like in EDR, a security person can say, kill this process remotely, right? Maybe they can say, a team viewer software on a server is just so bad, I don't even want to wait for IT to go and uninstall. I'm just clicking this and I'm uninstalling it. So it helps reduce my exposure. In other cases, you may need to have testing done to reduce something. So we're adding more and more ways to help with that remediation. There is no one single way that you can say this is one way to perfectly remediate everything. But I think the more capabilities that tools provide today that help customers fix things is what people are looking for, rather than your traditional vulnerability vendors that just give you a big long report that you have to go with to different teams to fix, right?
Are you looking at extending asset inventory to pivot through a deployed agent and see what else is on the network? There's a lot of multicast and broadcast, right? That just tells you all the stuff like, wow, this asset's in a really bad network. And I think you could make that assessment by some of the protocols that you could see, without even having to have a tap on the wire. Yeah,
exactly, right. I think for example, what the agent is an example, we can see the routing table, right? And you can pick up, hey, this device knows these other devices in the network. And now can you kind of push this information back into the backend and say, okay, yeah, that device I know because it already has an agent, or I've run a scan. Or maybe, hey, here's a device that was pulled up in the network. Maybe I'm not able to install a passive sniffer in that network, and so this is another way of doing that. So today, that's exactly what we do. Is there's no one single way. So you do some active scans, you do passive sniffing, you use the agent, you try to find other ways to read routing tables to detect devices that you know about. And be able to do that. And I think that's certainly, it's about not so much about one specific way, but more about a solution or a platform where you can bring in different data points, different data sources, and start to say, hey, here's managed devices and here's unmanaged devices, right? So you may want to say, if a Windows device is coming up in this data center, that's fine because I'd install Windows devices all day long. But if a Linux device shows up in this environment, then I should immediately be notified because it's an unmanaged device that doesn't meet my criteria. Now, how you detect that device could be a combination of different ways that you do. And one of those is, can I look at routing tables or things like that to find devices? So that's a capability that we have today.
That data correlation on the back end sounds like a real engineering challenge. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm sure there was many meetings about how to correlate all this data together.
Yeah, it's a beast. And I think when we re-architected the platform about 6-7 years ago, we kind of really said, why instead of creating a tailor-made platform to solve only one solution or bring up only one aspect of security, can we kind of create a streaming backend leveraging Kafka, Cassandra, Elasticsearch, a lot of the new technology, and that's where we spent a lot of time building a correlation platform, and that's one of the reasons why we are coming up with our XDR solution later this year. But the idea is that, can I bring a large amount of data and start correlating it in the back end, because the customers are not really able to deploy that kind of hardware on their environment anymore with the amount of volume of changes that are happening. And so today we have like 8 trillion data points when indexed in Elasticsearch with like 100 millisecond response time when you search for something. We have Kafka, which is doing like 15 billion messages a day. Cassandra clusters, we write anywhere between 1 to 2 million writes per second on these clusters. And it's never done. We're always looking at new technology that we can add to make this faster, better. Now we're looking at Spark and Flink and many other technologies as well. But yeah, we have an entire engineering team dedicated to that, because you need to be able to do this in as near real time as possible, because you don't want to be told 5 days after a device comes onto the network that, okay, finally I was able to correlate everything, and now I want to tell you that 5 days ago a device came up, right?
So is this something that's always running? Sorry, Tyler. Is this something that's always running? Is that configurable? Like how does this work?
Yeah, it's always running in the backend, right? Once you configure your sources, As the data starts to come in, we're continuously, as soon as the data comes in from any of the sensors or API, we look at it to say, do I have an asset that matches this already in the database or not? If there is one, I need to update it? If once I update that, then I have to check if there are rules for alerting or taking action that customer has set up to say, okay, fine, I found a new device and that device does not match the policy, then I need to create an alert or I need to create a remediation action. So it's an always on system that is continuously working in the backend, because you can't do it like vulnerability management where you kind of run a report, once a quarter and then, show it and start working on fixing these things.
Tyler?
Yeah, that ingestion delay, right? Like that has always been a common problem when you're correlating a lot of data like that. And the fact that you've got that back end to support that kind of outsourced off-prem, is there any downside to, what data has to get pushed out of an environment? And are there delays from that side of it? Obviously, the back end can handle that once the data gets there. But there's a front-end upload lift that needs to happen as well, right?
Yeah, and I think it's changing, people's perception. Like I said, I remember when I started in vulnerability management, and Paul probably remembers, you were good if you did a quarterly scan. Like you were awesome. You were like the most technologically advanced person for vulnerability management, right? And now that has changed. And I think the same thing is happening today where people want to know as soon as possible, and which means that not just our backend, but their systems need to have ways to get this data out faster and sooner and get it out for correlation. And so the more real time you can have, and that's one of the disadvantages, I would say, of some of the aggregators out there that are trying to do this by using APIs across 15, 20 different vendors, because you are going to pull this once a day from different vendors, and then you're trying to correlate that, and that doesn't necessarily give you the most real-time and up-to-date visibility, right? So, for example, with the passive sensor, what we can see is that within a minute, when a device connects and starts communicating, we can at least identify that there's a device here that's communicating. Then we start watching the device, and then within a few minutes, we can say, okay, this is an iPhone. Based on the traffic, and we can now provide that. So that is needed to have sensors that can collect this data faster, and that's sort of where do you install sensors that are more tailor-made, like quick active scan and an agent, or you try to rely on the data that you already have. The challenge, the advantage of relying on data you already have or vendors you already have is that you don't have anything else to install, but then you are dealing with these delays and processing and correlation issues, because getting two vendors to agree it's the same asset can be a challenge, right? The advantage of having native sensors is that you can get this line speed or close to that, but of course you have to do some effort to get some of these sensors out there, and that's the struggle always with security that we have had in deploying solutions.
So how's it happening? Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering, a lot of this, it makes perfect sense in the traditional data center. How's it all mapping over to your cloud environments, your Azures, your AWSs, your Googles?
Cloud is a little bit better in terms of being able to just use an API, right, to pull the data. And again, right, there's that balance between just the fact that there is an asset, or so your cloud API is going to be able to tell you, hey, somebody spun up a new instance, right? That's a good part about cloud, is that you can have an instant cloud trail alert or something that basically says that, okay, something new is spun up. And so then you don't need a passive sniffer in that environment. However, then the question is, well, what is that? What is running on these assets, right? So now can you have an automation, which is easier in the cloud environment, to say, okay, if a new asset is spun up, and can I quickly get an agent on that, which is going to make a very quick assessment to ensure that this is a device that belongs to me, or is has the right software running on it, or is not missing the software. So that cloud capability is more API based. So then that's where one of the things that we provide is to say, here's your cloud assets, here's your non-cloud assets, here's your SaaS assets. And the idea there is that in the cloud environment, you can do more automation, which is a little bit harder to do on the traditional assets or traditional data center or virtualization, where you don't have that centralized, powerful capability to add things onto that.
So, yeah, sorry. I was thinking the What happens with the short-lived assets? I mean, things that live for just a very short few number of transactions, or say up to 24 hours. Does that pose a challenge, or is it really just the same thing, just different level of granularity?
I mean, it has its advantage and disadvantage, right? The advantage is that it's short-lived, so it comes up and it goes quickly. But it also means that if you have a scanning-only approach, then it's not going to work that well, because by the time you actually get your scanner and install, updated, get the information out there, the asset is probably gone. But your exposure is limited because it's a short-lived asset, right? But in the other side, you can have an agent that's part of that asset. So as soon as the asset comes up, it is doing an immediate assessment and not having to wait for a scan. So you get that visibility as well. And at the end of the day, you have many different architectures. So while people do talk about short-lived instances, very, very few real architectures actually are doing these kind of really short-lived instances. A lot of times you still see instances when they come up, they do continue to run for a large amount of time, many days at times, and they do create that exposure. So an organization may say that, if something is there and it's coming from this particular image, then I know it's not going to last for more than a couple hours. So don't bother with it. In other cases, people say that something comes up from an image, and then the initialization puppet or whatever it is now goes out and pulls even more libraries that make the device vulnerable or is installing software that I don't want. And now you still need to do an assessment when a device is fully up and operational, so you can ensure that additional system management tools have not added more software that should not be there.
Sumedh, do you integrate with the credit card systems and pull the bill to look for new services that people have spun up? I swear that would be a valid source, right? Because we all know someone takes a corporate card. You may link into my corporate AWS, but hey, I got the corporate card. I can go spin up a new account and start spinning up S3 and opening up public shares, right?
I joke about this, but we did have a customer who said my incident response team is my finance team.
Yeah.
The first time I found about crypto miners in my AWS accounts was when the bill went up, and not my security team that found that, right? Again, that is a challenge. Where we see today some customers, what they've done is in the CI/CD pipeline, they install, make sure that they have a Qualys agent part of the AMI. And then what happens is when these developers take that base AMI and they are building their software and they bring it up in new accounts that the IT team or the security team doesn't know about because they went out and swiped a credit card. When that agent is connecting back, we're able to say, hey, your agent is now has shown up in an account that you have not configured as a known account. So we can give some visibility, right? It's not foolproof.
No, that's a good approach, though. I like it.
It's an interesting way to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly the ease at which you can spin up new infrastructure today is both an advantage and disadvantage to your vulnerability management program. Getting your arms around it is
exactly
stressful. Sumedh, we've had someone from your research team on the show twice now. Talk a little bit about how that idea kind of came to bear and the reasoning behind it and some of the efforts that are happening in your research team today.
You mean on the research side or on the
like a pseudo vulnerability, exim vulnerability?
I mean, we've always had a very strong research background, and as our research engineers that we have hired, as they have been maturing, we've published a lot of our own findings. And one of the things that I decided to do a few years ago was fund a team that really did pure research. That was really our way of sort of helping and giving back to the community, to be able to find these major flaws. And as you've seen, right, whether it was XM or whether it was sudo, we've had some very major things that were discovered. And this is not something that we don't keep this as a private thing that we charge for. Only special customers get it. It's just part of our overall community outreach and helping the community. So in fact, in XM, it was so overwhelming for the different distros and their teams that our teams actually ended up writing and submitting some of the patches so that they could get this out quickly, right? And so for those, it's just we as an organization that's focused on security want to be able to take some of the funding and the money and put it in original research, so that it's fresh on the minds of the customers. So that is helpful to us, but also in general helping the community discover some of these things so we can get those patched and ensure that doesn't end up being a way for things to be breached. Really,
yeah, it's interesting. Some may not realize that when you've got people who are writing vulnerability checks, how close they are to the vulnerabilities and exploits and the things that you start uncovering. That seems to be a trend that I don't think a lot of people realize, and it's cool.
Yeah, you see a lot, right? When they do a lot of reverse engineering when these patches come out, or when the vulnerabilities are discovered, and it's very natural then for them to take that time and effort to say, you know what, this is interesting, or I wonder how this other software is doing it, right? And they'll go take a look and they'll check, they'll test. And the advantage is over the period of time, we have built very powerful labs, right? Like one of the things for something like that is you need to have labs where you can bring up all kinds of different instances, all kinds of different hardware, software. And so our researchers have a good fertile playground where we have so many different things in our labs that they can try it, test it, and try to break it. And we can provide them that sort of a white space where they can really flourish and find more and more of these flaws.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Are you hiring? That sounds like a really cool job. I like
they enjoy it
space. I like that.
They enjoy it because there's no fixed deliverable, right?
Yeah,
they get to just bang away at code for months before they find that vulnerability. But I think somebody has to do it. The bad guys are doing it. They are investing the money to do something like that, so they can find that one thing they can sell for $1 million. So I think if we as the industry and organizations put some of our funding towards that and help find these things before the bad guys do, then it's just generally beneficial for everybody.
That's awesome. Just going back to the asset visibility, how does that correlate to all the different suite of tools in the Qualys platform? I'm assuming you're tying these things together so that like it's discovering stuff, and then I maybe don't want to scan it. Maybe I want to do more of a configuration audit or compliance, or using some of the other tools in the suite, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, that's the architectural advantage, that it's the same agent and the same scanner that you can use for vulnerability configuration, application scanning. And so once you have, it kind of goes both ways, right? Once you have this agent on the asset, it's very easy to say, wow, I found this new asset, or I found a bunch of software on this asset that I was not expecting. How can I do a quick vulnerability check? And you don't have to install anything else. That same agent can just quickly do a vulnerability check, can do a configuration check, can monitor your files, it can do EDR. So that's an advantage there to quickly be able to do this additional assessment. On the other side, if customers are using some of those products, so when they have an EDR event as an example, right? Your traditional EDR solution is going to say, machine CX25-36, we saw an alert. The IR person has no idea what that asset is, right? They have to now go to multiple different systems to find out the posture of the asset. The advantage there is that when they're in Qualys, they have an EDR event showing up in Qualys. They click on the asset, they immediately see the entire inventory of that asset, what software is running, what hardware is running, what software is end of life, what is unauthorized software, and the categorization of the software, right? If you see an event, or EDR event happening on a machine, and if you immediately out of the box, we're telling you that, by the way, that machine is running a database, your response is going to be much different than saying that, oh, that's just maybe just a lab machine or a desktop, or it's running a web server or whatever it is, right? So having that correlated on a single platform and that immediate visibility to say, wow, I saw a EDR event on a machine that is running a database in my production environment. Now, if you can layer on top of that to say, well, what about, I also additionally saw a file integrity event on that particular machine where a critical file was updated or accessed. And I also have an EDR event and it's running a database, right? Maybe that database could be an Elasticsearch, right? My Elastic file was accessed out of bounds. So how do you get all of that with a single system? That's really the power of that correlation and the single agent, is you start to now see that coming together versus going sort of the best of breed, where I get 5 agents from different vendors and try to make that work in through Splunk or something like that. That's a significant amount of effort and doesn't really give you that benefit that you're looking for.
How far back in the Windows history do you support officially the Qualys agent, Sumedh?
We are. There are some customers that we do Windows 7 as well, but I don't think we go beyond that right now. So we don't go back to XP or those environment. But yeah, I think that's something you'll have to go to the website and find out. I don't have the top of my head.
Yeah, so it wasn't so much about which ones, but like how do you deal with that situation as well? Like, I'm not going to put it. That's a finding. If I've got XP.
Yeah. But that's an end-of-life finding, right?
Yeah, that's a vulnerability.
That's an end-of-life finding. So if you can get an agent on that, then you can use information from your CMDB. You can do a quick scan, a remote scan, to find out more about that asset, because you cannot get an agent. And then you can use that finding. And based on that finding, you can create an alert on that. And that's exactly why a correlated approach is so important, and not just a single list of things that is coming from your CMDB at the end of the day. Because we give systems to our developers, and they are Windows systems, and like 30 seconds later, as soon as the developer gets it, it's now a Linux system, but my CMDB still says, hey, this is a Windows system, and it's not being updated.
Yeah. But I think, using the asset visibility to find things that don't have agents and aren't managed is super important, because that's the stuff that'll, it'll bite you. Older Linux, older Windows, and things like that is usually the issue.
Absolutely. And that's where we've created this. One of the features there is to find software that should be there. It's not there on those assets. And that's something that we highlight in that, where you can say, I expect to have antivirus, EDR, multiple different, 5 different things. This is a PC asset. It should have a FIM agent, and it's missing that. So that visibility is important.
Absolutely. Anything else on asset visibility or things happening at Qualys?
So many things, man. We're busy, but we've been busy building the platform, and really, as these things start to come together, we're quite excited about that asset inventory, because that really kind of gives a starting point. And the good thing about the asset inventory capabilities, it has nothing to do with your VM or any of these other things, right? So as an organization, you can just deploy this capability specifically for getting an inventory for as a starting point for any of your security solutions, right? And then, of course, the advantage for us as we are looking at building out the platform is that single agent can do your inventory, can do your vulnerability management. It can also patch your system. It can also do your EDR. And the idea is that for a given asset, can I discover things on the asset? Can I mitigate the risk by fixing and patching? And can I monitor it for active attacks? So you can do all of that in one. And that's kind of where the exciting part for us, other than the inventory capability, is by the end of the year, we're looking to provide an extended detection response solution that leverages this backend, the asset visibility, all the different things that we have, add additional enrichment from firewall logs, proxy logs, and then provide findings that are more extended out than just an endpoint detection.
Yeah, logs are, we could debate the security benefits of logs, because there's certainly a big list of pros and cons on both sides of it, right? But when it applies to asset vulnerability, it's pretty good, right? Like there's a lot of good tactics in there to go, I didn't know about this, but like someone logged in from this system and it ended up in a log somewhere, and that's an important aspect.
And then that's one of the things with when you just look at the different solutions in silo, right? If I just look at, okay, I have this vulnerability or I have this EDR thing on this machine, but when you layer on log information as well to say, okay, does that correlate with failed logins? Does that correlate with connections made to other systems? Like for example, I'm seeing a printer connecting to this device, which I don't expect. And well, because the printer is compromised, right? And so something is running on it that's reaching out. So that visibility and that correlation overall, I think, starts to become very interesting.
Outstanding. Any more questions for Sumedh?
Negative.
Sumedh.
I think it's end of the day, they are very quiet.
That's it. Sumedh, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly. Always nice having you on the show.
Hey, Paul, always a pleasure. Love the conversations here.
Outstanding. For folks that want to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Qualys. Coming up next, the security news. The CFAA has had a ruling, had some challenges. Talk about it coming up next.